will also have to come where those demands are coming from fathers, where he's coming in announcing he got engaged or the partner is pregnant or they're setting up home. That expectation of, oh, we know what track he's going to be on. And that's why it's really important that we're moving to this space of, instead of looking at women workers as slash mothers, we're looking at men as also fathers. That is going to be key for it.
Hello and welcome to the Empowered Woman podcast with me, Kieran Ephraim. This week I'm joined by Laura Bambrick. Laura is Head of Social Policy and Employment Affairs with the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. I wanted to chat to Laura about the history and context of the workplace in Ireland and women working in Ireland. Laura brings some fascinating facts and insights around how and why the workplace is structured the way it is in terms of working hours and what has happened that has brought about change for women and mothers. Laura, thank you so much for joining me on my podcast, The Empowered Woman. I want to start off, if you maybe talk me through. So I left my job when I had my little boy, and I kind of felt the reason I did that was I couldn't be the journalist I wanted to be whilst being the mother. I couldn't split myself in two. And I kind of feel that the way society is structured is that it doesn't allow us be both. So the way the workforce is structured, the 9 to 5 or the shift work, it's that we're always sacrificing something for something else. What are your thoughts on how, the workplace is structured, how we work in Ireland? And does it allow mothers, families and dads, does it allow us to thrive?
Thanks, Ciara, and thanks for the invitation to join you on your podcast. So within my job, one of my big areas is looking after the policy and the legislation that improves workers' work-life balance.
Yeah.
When we're talking about work-life balance, we have a tendency to talk about working parents and in particularly working mothers. But work-life balance is something that is of interest and relevance to all workers, regardless of what stage of the life cycle you're at, whether you're starting out as the young worker, whether you have the young family, whether you're the empty nester, whether you're the dinky, the double income, no children. But when we talk about it, either in the media or as policy and legislators, there is a tendency to focus on that particular stage of the life cycle and particular stage of the family. And we're in trade union conference season at the moment. And usually I get asked to talk about an ongoing campaign, and a campaign may be around work-life balance. So that can be things like strengthening workers' rights to remote working, which has been really powerful for women, helping them to stay in the workforce when they have that young family, or do more hours, maybe not having moved from part-time, they can keep that full-time job. Or things like childcare. That's a huge thing for work-life balance. And holidays. I spend a surprising amount of time talking about public holidays. But when I'm asked to talk about work-life balance, and I'm not asked to talk about a particular campaign, what I like to do is remind our members of where we've come from and how relatively recent that has been, because that can explain a lot of where we are at the moment. And what I mean about that is Ireland is one of very unusual in an EU context of having no public childcare.
Yeah.
We have zero publicly delivered childcare. It's all privately delivered. 3/4 of that is being delivered private for profit and a quarter private not for profit, so the community childcare, but still private nonetheless. It's only in the last 30 years that we have started to record a mother's occupation on the child's birth cert. It's only 10 years this year since working fathers have an entitlement to 2 weeks paid leave when their child is born.
Yeah.
We still yet have to have a female Taoiseach in this country, a female Minister for Finance. We have had fewer than 2,000 or 2 dozen women in senior leadership roles. And so when we think about, although those things, how recent they are, it does help to explain the policy context because
Yeah.
that casts a long shadow of where we are today. And one of the many good things to come out of the 1926 census, and I'm a huge fan of it, is it's making us realize how relatively recent 100 years ago was. So
Yeah.
the Irish state is little over 100 years old, December 1922. When we're talking about policy decisions that were made in the 1920s and the 1930s, there's a tendency for us to think, oh, it's way back there. It's in a monochrome world. It belongs in the black and white photographs, black and white films. But when we see the names on the 1926 census, when we see names maybe of a great grandmother we
Yeah.
knew when we were young, but we've definitely heard their name. We're talking about the society they were born into, they
Hmm.
married into, they worked into. And we, as workers, as women, as mothers, are still living that long tail, that long
Yeah.
shadow that has been cast over it. And sorry if I've gone off on a
No.
path, but to explain how we are struggling as a country in a policy context to help workers with a better work-life balance, to be that parent, to be that child, that providing care for a parent, which we are one of the first generations to that have careers, have jobs, and now have both have children. Our parents can't offer us childcare because Granny now has a job as well, has a career. But then Granny and Grandad, our parents, will also have care needs as the
Yeah.
population aging. So you hear these things about the sandwich generation,
Mm.
where you're providing care for your young dependents and your adult aging parents as well. And then the public system isn't set up to be able to support you. I mentioned that absence of childcare. That's equally true when we look at our entitlements and our supports around in-home care for our aging population or other vulnerable children, vulnerable adults, because it was built around that expectation that the work-life balance would be divided by gender roles. The man would go out, earn the wage, and the woman would provide all the unpaid care, the care of the household, the care of everybody in that household, the care even in the community.
Hmm.
And we're making that transition where we're recognizing that those roles aren't as clear cut
Yeah.
anymore.
And it's really interesting. It's fascinating, but it kind of sounds really bleak in a way that we had a system, I suppose, set up by men for men in Ireland when we look back historically, and that by default the women have become the carers, and not as much value is placed on the role of caring in our society, even the role of the mother in our society. So what do we need to do to bring it back, I suppose, into balance where men and women can go to work and thrive equally, and our children can be minded in whatever way we want them minded, and that it doesn't fall to the woman to mind her parents and his parents and the children and run a household and everything else that comes with that. In policy terms, Laura, where do we go with that?
Well, I guess to just go back on something that you said there, this was a system designed by men for men. In many ways, that's correct. But
Mm.
men also got a raw deal
Yeah,
out of this as well.
exactly.
So the system was designed, as I said, around that ideal of the man as the financial provider, the woman as the care provider. And it was next to impossible to break out of that. Now, in many ways, Ireland wasn't unique. This
Mhm.
ideal was the norm across Europe, including those Nordic states that we all aspire to today. What was different with Ireland is that we remained attached to that ideal for so long. Other countries
Okay.
had moved on. Partly that was because we didn't have involvement in the wars, and they were big triggers for big social changes in countries. But where other countries tended to support this ideal, the Irish state or legislation went further, and the argument could be said that we enforced this ideal rather than support it. So, as I said, it was very hard to break through. So, even to the extent that if a man was left widowed with a young family, he had no entitlement to any one parent family payments up until the early 90s, not even an entitlement to a contributory widow's pension. So he was given a payment that would allow him to hire a female housekeeper, typically a female relative, and was forced to go out and continue to work to
Sure.
provide for the family, even in the absence of it. So men have had, been absent from their child's life. As I said, only
Yeah.
2016 when we have introduced the first 2 weeks of paid leave for fathers. Before that, in the 1990s, they could get some paid leave off, but it was only if the death of the mother occurred in and around childbirth. So basically, he inherited an entitlement to maternity leave. So it was a pretty cold world for men too. And just another final point on that, we have to be careful looking back that we don't do it through today's eyes, because the world of work was a much harsher place than it is today. So you were working much longer hours than you are today. You didn't have entitlement around weekends, around breaks, around annual leave. You didn't have entitlements even, to keep your job if you became pregnant. You could be sacked for that. Running the household was also a lot harder. We didn't have the appliance that we have today. Now, I know there's an argument that the more appliances that have been brought into the family home, they have generated more work because, the standard of cleanliness wasn't what it was then. So, in many ways, if the division of labor worked, if you chose your baby daddy well, and he was going out, he could work, he was coming back, he was giving you the money to allow you to run the house. It was a pretty good deal for a lot of women. And we can see that through some of the feminists of the day, the main trade union women of the day. They really believed in this family wage to allow this ideal to prosper. The difficulty happened then with if you were outside of this ideal. So if you had a man that abandoned you, you were a deserted wife, as you were known then, because of course we didn't have divorce until 1996. If you were a lone parent, if you were a widow, the system wasn't able to cope with you as a working mother. And it's only really been in. So the first wave that we had of getting rid of the blatant discrimination to women workers and working mothers was in the 1970s. There's a great saying that the 1960s arrived in Ireland in the 1970s. So you had feminism coming, but you also had the big thing of Ireland joining the
The
EU,
EU.
the EC as it was known then. And that, we will say, imposed social legislation and equality on us. But we have to remember Ireland is part of the EU. All those decisions that are made over in Brussels, they're made in the council, signed off in the parliament, and we are part of that council, that parliament. So we can't say, it's them over there have dragged us into modernity. We were also part of that journey, but it definitely moved us further and faster than we might have done off our own bat. So in the 1970s, we got rid of the blatant discrimination. Then in the 1990s, we acknowledged that women were also workers and mothers. Now, we didn't do too much to support them, but we
Yeah.
did acknowledge it. So things like you couldn't get fired for being pregnant. We improved the protections around part-time workers. Part-time work is still used to this day as the main work-life balance instrument that helps women balance that to hold on to their career
Mm.
while also, being the mother or the daughter or the wife that they also want to be. And it's only really into the noughties, into this century, that we are starting through policy, through legislation to go, wait a minute, maybe the men have something around work life balance, that they want to be better fathers or more involved in fatherhood. And they want that balance with their career as well. And really, we've seen a lot of that around remote working and
Mhm.
around COVID. Because instead of this being a flexible working arrangement that was mummy tracked, like part time work, like term time working, not working the school holidays, remote working, because it was done during lockdown, we all had to take that leap at the same time.
Okay.
And all of a sudden, Daddy was home, probably doing the homeschooling at the first few months and wasn't too keen on that. But when we were still in lockdown, the schools were back open, they were also there to do the school drop off, to be
Mhm.
there to lead them to GAA or swimming classes, to be on the sideline of the pitch. And there's a real sense that men, for the first time, seen what work-life balance looked like. And that's what I believe is also behind this push to maintain remote working, because it's not just a feminized demand for better work-life balance. It's something that is impacting all workers. And I think, very long-winded way of answering your question, like, how do we get to that better space? I think the better space, more hopeful, has been recognizing that fathers and men and better work-life balance is something that's relevant to both genders, but also, again, across the life cycle. It shouldn't be something that happens that you care about when you're in Holles Street or the Coombe or
Yeah.
wherever maternity hospital that you're in. It should be, part of your working life, that you can have that balance.
Talk to me a bit more about that, actually. That's a really interesting point that, as young workers, that we should be thinking about, the rights that we feel we should be entitled to later in life and then later in life again. How does that impact, I suppose, the earlier worker? How does their thinking and their behavior and wants and needs impact what they get later?
I guess, like, again, coming back to remote working, we're told that remote working is bad for younger workers because they're missing out in that experience of being in the job, making those friendships, meeting that potential partner, that whole experience. But when we look at opinion data, what we find is that younger workers have the same appetite for remote working as those of us who are older that might have those
Mhm.
care demands on us, or those caring responsibilities on us. So there isn't an age divide around the appetite for
Yeah.
more remote and flexible working. What we are finding, though, is that a lot of the appetite is also around unfortunately, the housing crisis. So having more flexibility for them is also meaning that they have a wider scope of where they can live, the distance that they can live from their job, because that option that would have been available to us as younger workers, living one short bus ride, or maybe living in walking distance of those first jobs we have,
Mhm.
aren't available to them. So it's been presented as, oh, younger workers benefit from presenteeism, being in the office, being in the workplace. Well, if you have to get, two buses and a train home in the evening, you're not going to be available for after work drinks. So, or if you're paying over half of your wages out on rent, you're
Yeah.
not going to be having those, salad bowls out with your friends, sitting at the waterfront on lunchtime. So
Mhm.
workers, and I think this generation of younger workers are more in tuned with work-life balance, that what
Yeah.
they do outside, whether it's sport, whether it's music, whether it's their friendship group, whether it's traveling, they have more of appreciation that their job doesn't define them. And they're, they're not the same suckers as are, thinking, I have to go, I have to put in that 110%. They're much more aware of, this is my contract, this is what I'm paid to do, these are the hours I put in, and I will deliver as I am being contracted to do. But
Yeah.
I also have the me that exists outside. And I think it's very encouraging
Yeah.
when you hear from workers that, are, are aware of the division between their work and life.
Yeah, it's so interesting and good on them, I say. You just mentioned something really interesting there when you were talking about the arguments for and against young people being in the office or working from home. And one of the, I suppose, companies' arguments would be is that, they're not meeting the partner. And that narrative around kind of like trying to keep everything in life evolving around your job, the work situation, keep the economy going, that kind of attitude. And I was listening to something a couple of weeks ago, a podcast, Emma, I don't know how to pronounce her surname, Emma Grede, maybe. And she was saying that it's career suicide for women to work from home. And I just find, so like meeting your partner, career suicide to work from home, they're so like, I mean, where are we going if that's the attitude, you know?
Yeah, and I think with remote working, we're seeing it more. There's more. Actually, if you look at the figures, there are more men doing remote, and it's never. Very few people do 100% remote.
Mm,
Most of it is hybrid working. So
yeah.
this idea that you get a job, you get your laptop, and you disappear out into the
Disappear.
suburbs, never to be seen again, apart from on the occasional Teams meeting,
Yeah.
doesn't exists.
No.
Most people have a 2 or 3 day and increasing number of cases a 4 day requirement to be on site, to be in person, where remote is allowing you just to claw back a bit of your time. But because of the different types of jobs men and women do, men tend to be in the jobs that are more amenable to being able to be done remotely, hybrid working.
Mm.
Women tend, if you think about it, tend to be in a lot of the jobs that have to be done in person, where remote and hybrid opportunities aren't there. So, in fact, if we look overall, it's more men doing remote and hybrid than women. But we've always heard this about, oh, you have to be seen, you have to be visible. We had that about playing golf. We had it about Friday night drinks
Yeah.
and things like that. And the best way to do it is to ensure that as we move to more flexible working, that it's not mommy tracked, that
Yeah.
it's not saying that, oh, she's coming back from baby number two, we can expect her to go part time, or we can expect it term time working. You won't be working June, July, and August, or you'd be looking for job share and things like that. Where I do think we're going to see more of a gender balance is we talk a lot of population aging. We talk less and less about the workforce aging.
Yeah.
So more and more people will be staying in the workforce for longer. And by that, I mean just into their 60s, because there is a tendency to leave the workforce gradually from your late 50s into your 60s. And sometimes that's because workers don't want to leave. But it's either leave or stay, and it's Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, in the office, so the 2 hour commute as well added onto that
Yeah.
40 hour week. Where having more flexible arrangements is going to allow older workers to have longer working lives, which is going to have to be government policy. As I said, the population is aging. They have to wake up to the fact that the workforce is also aging. And how are we going to facilitate? So when you see somebody requesting remote working 2 days from home, it's not going to be the mother of two just asking. It's going to be the senior partner that are, in their early 60s, but believe that they still have more to give in their work, but just want to take a step off that rat race of getting in the car at 7, not pulling into the driveway till 7, 12 hours later. So things are happening that aren't being done with gender equality in the workplace necessarily in mind, like remote working was in response to a global pandemic.
Pandemic.
What
Yeah.
we are seeing, even if we look at the growth in the workforce, that is being driven by two main demographics: women and older workers, for exactly those reasons. That when you have baby number two, you mightn't have to leave because the cost of childcare and the hours of doing it, the numbers don't add up. But also allowing those over 60s to extend their working lives. So we are getting some sort of external cast-offs of other things that are happening. We are benefiting from it. But again, we are still reliant on the policy requirements to bring up minimum standards coming from Europe as well. That still is our biggest driver for helping working women today.
Okay. And that mummy tracking, that's a really important point you make. And in matrescence coaching, we call it the maternal wall. So all those expectations, oh, well, she just got married, so she's probably going to have a baby soon. Oh, she's just back from maternity leave. Give her 6 months to a year, she's probably going to have her second baby. Oh, she's probably not interested in that promotion because she's just had a baby or because she's pregnant. All those kind of ways of thinking. Like, how do we get companies to change that culture of thinking?
Well, of course, there's lots of legislation to prevent them from doing that, but there's many ways to skin particular cats. So they mightn't be
Okay.
saying out loud, there's
Yeah.
no point in putting Kira forward for that training because, baby number one's down, as you said, baby number two can be expected, or she's come in with the engagement ring. We know where the next few years are going. People don't say those things out loud,
No,
but they're
but they're
there, and
there.
we feel that it's all the unsaid,
Yeah.
that's there. I think this generation of women, because we have invested so much into our careers through our education, through our ongoing education, that we might, drop out, but we come back in, and you can see even on Instagram, you might have stepped out of your career job, but women are still looking for side hustles to keep the foot in, because that brain is still thinking. It didn't turn to mush when you were handled this bundle. So they are still trying to strike the work-life balance.
Mm.
Again, it's going to be things like population aging, where workforces, where the workforce in general and companies in particular cannot afford to lose key members of staff. They are going to have to facilitate you staying in the workforce, maybe staying on part time, not giving it up, or facilitating things like a hybrid arrangement that you can either go long part time or you can maintain long time. But it will also have to come where those demands are coming from fathers, where he's
Mm.
coming in announcing he got engaged, or the partner is pregnant, or they're setting up home. That expectation of, oh, we know what track he's going to be on. And that's why it's really important that we're moving to this space of, instead of looking at women workers as slash mothers, we're looking at men as also fathers. And that is going to be key for it, that we're
Yeah.
looking at all 30, 40 somethings as potential as parents, or potential parents to a bigger family, or parents to a younger family, or with their own with their own parents that will be requiring care and support as well. And slowly, what is happening is we are seeing more women in senior roles, which, they're the generation that came up the harder way. They didn't have, we can talk about the dirt of the absence of policy and services to support us, but they really had to come up with the sharp
Mm.
elbows in it. So there can be that awareness there of what you're going through, juggling, and be more aware, and raise other women in there. That doesn't get done often enough.
Hmm. Um, I just want to go back to, I suppose, talking about the value that we place on mothers. And I suppose I chatted about this with Alva Smith on last week's podcast. Men don't have gender, women have gender, and that anything that a woman has done historically, anything we do, even biologically, that there is no value on it. And another thing that happened in a workplace, and I won't name the workplace, but there was a particular desk in this workplace, and a senior member of the management team said to me, "That's where all the young mothers go. So once you become a mother, that's where you go to work." And I thought, my God, the fact that you even think that, and the fact that you even do that, but you've said that to another young woman. Can policy shift that? Or is that bigger than policy?
Well, I guess where we see it and we can make decisions subconsciously long before we're even mothers can be around our career choice. So I spoke back there and said actually it's more men that are working hybrid
Mm.
than women, because if we think about it, women are in more of the caring professions, so you can't do that on a laptop, or they're in more in teaching roles, and a lot of these jobs we choose them because they do allow better work-life balance. So if you think of a midwife or a nurse, mostly she, but increasingly they, will work compressed hours. So they might work 3 or 4 very long days, but then they have a 3 or 4 weekend. And if
Mhm.
they're married to another nurse or another healthcare professional, that does allow them to, probably not have to use childcare, maybe only use a small bit of childcare, but balance it between them. The same with school teachers. You're not then taking the term time leave because you are off leave. So we do make roles that are more conducive to us being mothers and carers long before we are mothers and carers. And I guess what we need to do is look around that Monday to Friday, 40-hour week, 9 to 5, where we can have change that, because that was built around this premise of there would be somebody at home
Yeah.
stripping the beds, filling the shelves, washing the kids,
Cooking the
making sure the
food.
local football team was also
Yeah.
washed and things like that. But if you're doing a Monday to Friday, and of course with, retail now a 7-day a week, a lot of people, their weekend may be Monday and Tuesday.
Mm.
But if work isn't really structured around flexibility, around allowing people to do compressed hours or split shifts, things like doing the few hours in the morning, taking a longer break, and then logging on and doing things at night. You can see a lot of women that do retail jobs and hospitality jobs. They do it because those type of jobs allow them to come in, do the few hours, be back, pick up the kids, do the homework, do the feeding, maybe even get them to bed, and do a second shift into the evening. But that sort of structure to the working week is only done in certain sectors. And unfortunately, the more feminized a sector becomes, the lower the pay. So if you think about it, why do we pay our childcare providers just above minimum pay, 50
Yeah.
cents above minimum pay? But the mostly guys that will look after our car are paid above average pay. So there is a tendency that we look for the type of job that will allow us to
Mm.
better balance it. But really, we have to look about structuring the working week around more flexibility to allow everybody to do it, irrespective of the sector that you moved in. And they are big changes. You
Yeah.
do need big bang events to happen like that, like COVID, like legislation that came in 1997 that reduced, put parameters on the length of the working week, and all of a sudden, our father's generation would have been used to doing a 6-day week.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
wasn't unusual to do the 5 full days and a half day Saturday.
Saturday.
With
Yeah.
this legislation in 1997, the half day Saturday became less and less the norm. So you do have things that do change and make it more make it more possible to have better work-life balance, but it has to be sector wide because
Mm.
the kiss of death to a sector, the paying conditions of a sector is that it becomes feminized. Unfortunately, that's where all the evidence points to. As soon as a particular job or particular sector becomes feminized, you do see it terms and conditions in decline, and then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Men are less likely to do it because the terms and conditions are bad.
Yeah, God, that's awful. And there we go again with the value that's placed on women and the work that women do and our contribution. Like, gosh, we've a body of work to do there. Laura, are you hopeful that things are they going in the right direction? And what more can we do collectively? Not just what more do women need to do, but what more does society need to do?
I think I am hopeful as we started this conversation talking about, how shocking is it that only in 10 years that men have this entitlement to 2 weeks off when they have a new child, or that it is only recent, but we have come a considerable distance in a short time. So there's one thing to say men have this entitlement, but at the moment, that entitlement only entitles fathers to €299, just short of €300. Now, unless your employer tops up your wage, and there's no, it's not mandatory required that they would top up your wage, it's going to be very difficult for fathers to exercise that new right. And we can see that in the take up of paternity. And recently now, there's also the additional 9 weeks parents' leave. So in total, fathers have 11 weeks over the first 2 years of their child. But those 11 weeks are only paid at just under €300. So it's going to be a very small minority of men that are going to be able to exercise that right. So it's one thing improving workers' rights around work-life balance. It's another layer, and that's where the next battle is, ensuring that these things are pay related, that people can afford to vindicate their rights. And that's where I think it's going to be really around. And to be optimistic, there is a commitment in the program for government to look at moving to pay related family leave, those 9 weeks that both the father and the mother um, can get for the first 2 years, moving away from that flat payment to something that's pay related. Because even if you're earning a full-time minimum wage, €300 is, little under half of what you would be getting as a full-time minimum wage. So, it's the most expensive time for a young family is when a baby is born, and to ask both parents, because the maternity leave mightn't be topped up by the employer as well. So that's also at 299. We have to ensure not only that workers have the rights, but they are being facilitated to be able to exercise those rights. So hopeful in the sense that when we look back, it's not so shocking that these things only happen so recent, but hopeful in that we've come this far in a relatively short time. And
Yeah.
it is a lot to do with how we've developed, how we've modernized as a society, as an economy, and they have been the big drivers. It hasn't been somebody sitting down in government buildings going, how can we make this better for women and mothers? It's like, how are we going to find the workers that we need? Or how are we going to make sure that we're getting bang for our buck for all this money we're investing in third level if somebody is dropping out within 10 years of joining the workforce because we're not providing them with childcare, or we're not supporting them with flexible work arrangements, or there's no elder care. So it mightn't be done with us top of mind. We might be there somewhere down the list, but we will benefit from big mega trends, population aging, migration, things like that. We'll get the secondary benefit from.
That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying these conversations, please like, follow and share the podcast so others can benefit too. My name is Ciara and I'm a life coach who supports women to thrive personally and professionally. I offer one-to-one coaching sessions or monthly coaching memberships through the Women's Collective by BU Coaching, and you can find details of those services attached to this podcast.